Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.
The Church of Christ in Canada welcomes you to Key to the Kingdom. Today's lesson is entitled, Preparing to Leave the Wilderness.
Thank you for joining us today on Key to the Kingdom. We're very happy to have this opportunity to come into your home and study the Word of God with you. I wanted to tell you about a little booklet that we have. We are members of the Churches of Christ in Canada. When Steve introduces the program each week, he talks about that. He says the Church of Christ in Canada welcomes you to the program. It is the Church of Christ that provides the funding for the program through free will gifts, which we appreciate. And so we get people asking us, just who are you and something about us. Well, we have a booklet that's entitled Churches of Christ, Who Are These People? And we would be happy to send you a copy of this booklet. It will give you a little bit of history and also some information about some of the basic beliefs that we have. And we would certainly be happy to send this along. Just when you call in, just ask for the booklet on the church, and we'll be happy to send it to you. Now today, as we continue our journey, and it's been kind of a journey, through the unfolding plan of God, we are still in the Old Testament. We're going to be moving to the New Testament in the next few weeks, but right now we still are trying to get the people of Israel out of bondage and into the Promised Land. As we talked last week, they spent 40 years in the wilderness, going from place to place. We don't know exactly how much they may have moved around. We don't know a whole lot about those 40 years. But we do know that they came as a result of the lack of faith they had to take the Promised Land, which God said, I'll give it to you, but they did not take it. But we are getting ready to the point where it's time to make arrangements for leaving the wilderness and going into the Promised Land. And there are preparations that need to be made, but one of those preparations needed to be a reminder to the people of whose they were, that is God's. And they needed to be reminded of what God expected. And so the books of the Old Testament tell us about the rules and regulations that were set down, some of the doctrinal beliefs that were laid out and things like that. I want to focus today on the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is an important book in the Old Testament. It is, in a sense, a restatement of the law of Moses as it talks about many of the things that were a part of this law. It is one of the most quoted Old Testament books in the New Testament. The four in the New Testament that are quoted most are Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy, and Genesis. In fact, when quoting from the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Jesus refers twice as many times to Deuteronomy as to the other 4. He refers to several things, several main doctrines, several important points that were a part of the message from the book of Deuteronomy. And there are some major themes in the book, and I thought it would be good for us as we think of the people getting ready to leave the wilderness, go into the promised land, to look at some of the things that were shared with them as it was the intention of Moses to prepare them for the eventualities that were before them. And so I think the first thing that we would note is found in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 35. Deuteronomy 4, verse 35, which says, "You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Beside Him there is no other." This was a statement to emphasize who God is. If you go to chapter 32, in verse 39, again we have God saying through Moses to the people, "See now that I myself am He. There is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. I have wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand." Here, again, the reference being made and the reminder of just who God is, that He is the creator and the sustainer of life. You remember, if you've been with us in this series, that we began back at creation because God is the one who created. God is the one who formed man. God is the one who has the right to expect some things from man in reference to obedience to His will. Now, you know, God is the God of heaven. We believe that He is Jehovah God, that He is, as I said, the creator, but also the sustainer of life, that it is through His wisdom that the world was put together. And isn't it amazing how wonderful this world is put together? Isn't it wonderful how it is that things work together to accomplish needed things for us in our life? And even more so, consider the human body. Consider how it provides us with the things that are necessary for life. It allows us to go and do and so forth. Now, certainly there are cases where people, because of some deformity or something like that, some illness, are hindered. But generally speaking, think about how wonderful it is that your body works so well, that it is able to use the food that you eat to provide you with the energy to do the things that you do. You know, I've been amazed in my life thinking about what blood tells us. You know, it was God's will that we not eat blood. That's what He says. And that was certainly part of the old law, was not to eat blood. And He says, because life is in the blood. And you know, if you've experienced, as I have, some health issues, you know that one of the first things the doctors want to do is take some blood and check it out. Well, it's amazing, isn't it? But that's God. That's the God who looked after us and created us and made us so that these things can be used to help us out. Look at chapter 32 of Deuteronomy and notice what we have in verse 37 and 38. He will say, "Now, where are their gods? The rock they took refuge in, the gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings? Let them rise up to help you. Let them give you shelter. See now that I myself am He. There is no God beside me. I put to death and bring to life. I have wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand." You see, God says, what about those gods they had? You know, the gods that were made of stone, the gods that were made of wood. We read an account where He talks about the idea of a person cutting down a tree and taking part of that tree and using it for firewood to warm himself and cook perhaps, and then taking part of that and setting it up as an idol to bow before. It was important for God and important for them and important for us, I think, to recognize that God is God, that He is the God of gods, that He is the Lord of lords. In Deuteronomy 10 and in verse 17, He says, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes." You know, I love that statement there about God. I love the idea that God is awesome. If you know me, you know that one of my pet peeves in this world is the use that people give sometimes of the idea of awesome or the word awesome. God is spoken of as being awesome in the Word of God, and I believe that indeed He is. And I understand awesome to be something that just kind of, brings you to the point where your mouth drops open and you stand in awe. And I hear people talking about, they were at a restaurant and ate an awesome sandwich or whatever. Well, I guess they had to open their mouth to eat the sandwich. But to me, the word awesome ought to be a word that's limited to God. God is awesome. We stand in awe of Him because of His great power and because of His love for us. Even that comes into understanding that. Let's look at one more passage about God and His greatness, His awesomeness. In Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts." Who is God? He's the one we're to love, not with some kind of flighty, passing love like something you fall into and fall out of. It's interesting, isn't it, how people just love. And I've know friends of mine who I'll meet and they'll tell me, "Man, I love this. I found this and I love this." And 6 months later I see them and I say, "What about that?" And they're, "Well, they don't like that anymore." Well, that's not the kind of love that we give to God. But we love Him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Secondly, it was an act of grace that brought to the people the covenant. Look at chapter 7 of Deuteronomy and notice there verse number 8. "But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath He swore to your forefathers, that He brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt." So here, Moses is reminding these folks that they are where they are who they are, they have what they have because of the power of God. They had been, as you know, slaves in Egypt for 430 years. And now they have been brought out by the mighty hand of God. And they have been led to this point where in a little while, at the time this is written, in a little while, they're going to finally enter into that land that was promised to them. Now, the point, it seems to me, in what's being said there to these people is, understand what's happening to you is not happening because you have been all that good. One thing that we know for sure is that the people of Israel, during the time they were in the wilderness, complained a lot. And perhaps we would complain a lot too, but the point is, it wasn't because they had demonstrated such loving zeal and care and so forth that they were being blessed, but it was because of the promise that God made. Remember, He made that promise first to Abraham in Genesis 12, and then later on to Isaac and Jacob, that He would indeed bless the people of Israel, and He did that. So it was an act of grace and love that brought this covenant. Through His covenant, God demonstrates His faithfulness, His love, and His holiness. The fact that He made a promise and He carried that promise out. God's care of Israel is not based on their righteousness either, but because of His faithful promise that He had made to Abraham. Chapter 9 of Deuteronomy, verses 5 and 6. And so, as we look at this, we see a lesson in the book of Deuteronomy, a lesson for the people to realize, number one, how blessed they were. I mean, the fact that God had led them out of bondage, even though they weren't happy with the time in the wilderness, God had provided for them during that time. And He had cared for them along the way. But they had been delivered from slavery. They had been delivered from the awful conditions they found themselves in Egypt. All because of the love of God. And so this covenant that God has with Israel is grounded in the past. Okay, it's grounded in the promise that God made. Folks, the promise, or at least the unfolding plan of God, is based on the promise of God. Now, the promise of God was given back even in the Garden of Eden, that at some day there would be a deliverer come who would care for everybody. But then specifically, the covenant that we're talking about here with Israel was made through Abraham. So it had a past. It was anchored in the past. It was anchored in the relationship that God had and the promise that God made. Secondly, it had meaning in the present. For the people who were then living, there's a promise, there's a covenant. God said, I'm going to look after you. I'm going to give you what you wouldn't take 40 years ago. Now, He didn't say it just like that, but that's what it boils down to. They could have been in the promised land 40 years ago. But no, they had to fuss and fight and carry on and decide that they just couldn't do it. Even though God said, I will go for you. I will fight for you. But then there was also a promise for the future. And that promise for the future is what this whole series of lessons is leading up to. Because you and I in 2015, we enjoy the promise of that covenant. Because through that covenant, God was going to send someone, His Son, Jesus, who became the atoning sacrifice for all who would listen to Him, who would come to Him, who would obey the gospel and live the Christian life. Okay, thirdly, one of the points that's borne out in the book of Deuteronomy is the importance of keeping the covenant. Go to chapter 28, Deuteronomy chapter 28, here in verses 1 and 2. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all His commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. It was important that the people would obey the law of God. Their relationship to God, their blessings from God, their deliverance by God, the fact of God going to battle for them was based on their obedience. Obedience would bring all the blessings that were promised and was proof of God's love for them. Because God said He would do this, and He did it. He said that He would bless them, and He did it. But remember also that the other side of the coin was true. If they didn't obey Him, then they paid the cost. And we'll see that early in their moving into the land of Canaan, that land that flowed with milk and honey. And number 4, the relationship between God and Israel was one that was based on love. Now, we've said that, but we just need to emphasize. Look at chapter 6 and verse 5, which we looked at earlier, but just to remind ourselves, he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength." You know, folks, one of the characteristics of love is respect. And in the case of God, one of the marks of love is obedience to His will. The fact that people are willing to give themselves to God, to obey Him, to walk with Him. And walking the Christian way is not always easy. It requires of us a commitment to God's will. It requires of us a realization that the world really has nothing to offer that is worth violating God's law for. Their love and the love of God can be commanded because it's a decision. The love relationship that exists between us and God is a relationship that is commanded. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength. It's not a feeling. That's the point. It's not a feeling. It's not some kind of a warm, fuzzy thing that comes over you and you feel, it's not what it is. But it's a command to say, okay, I love God, and if I love God, I'm going to honor God, and I honor God how? Well, Jesus said, if you love me, what will you do? You'll keep my commandments. You'll keep my commandments. And so, if in fact we want to honor God, if we want to be close to God, if we want to do His will, then we, in love, respond to Him and do what we know He wants us to do. The things that do not bring sorrow to Him, but joy. Remember Jesus Himself. When Jesus came to earth, He became a man just like us. He lived for 33 or so years. He did not sin because He did not violate the law of God. Why? Because He couldn't? No, He could. He was tempted, we're told, in every point like we are, yet without sin. Why? Because He loved God the Father and was committed to Him and was not willing to give in to the enticements of Satan. Well, I would encourage you, if you want to take some time and do some reading in the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 12 through 26 are very enlightening as to the law and what was expected of the people of God, how they were to live their life from day to day. You understand that the law was not simply the 10 Commandments, but it was rather that entire body of information that said how we treated our neighbor, for example. Here you'll read marriage laws. You'll read laws about how we settle differences and so forth. They did under the old law. So, I encourage you to read from Deuteronomy chapter 12 through 26. It'll be a blessing to you. Thank you for being with us today. Continue to study the Word of God. Contact us if we can help you in any way. Contact us for our Bible course and our DVDs. We're happy to send them to you free. May God bless you in your study of His Word. And join us again next week on Key to the Kingdom. There's a great deal to be learned in our study of the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses is giving direction to the people of Israel about preparing to live a godly life. He says in chapter 11, verse 18 beginning, "Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord has sworn to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth." Here, Moses is recognizing the need for the people to open the Word of God, to listen to what God has to say. Not only for them to do it themselves, that is, the adults, but to teach it to their children as well, to help them learn and understand what God's will is. On Key to the Kingdom, our goal is to get you to open the Word of God with us as we study. But more than that, to get you to open the Word on your own, at home, as you open the Word and seek to know God's will. We're happy to provide you free a Bible correspondence course that's based entirely on the Word. And as you read these lessons, one of the things that I recommend that you do is have your own Bible right there, and on every passage that's quoted in these booklets, that you check and make sure that what's in here is in this book, the Word of God. And that you will learn these things and apply them to your life. Contact us, get this study, and be blessed by it. And may God bless you in your study of His Word.
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim this, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.